This winter, a police officer followed a scream into the snow and found something that would change his life forever. A wounded German Shepherd puppy lying across a dying baby deer, refusing to move even as blood soaked the frozen ground. What choice would you make if you were that dog? What would you do if you were that officer standing in the silence of the forest? This story is not just about survival. It is about love, courage, and the moment that decides who we become. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from and leave a comment below. Your words connect this story to the world. And if stories of hope, animals, and human kindness matter to you, please tap the subscribe button now and support the channel, because what happens next in the snow will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The winter arrived in the mountain town of Ravenwood without asking permission. Snow fell in heavy curtains from a colorless sky, smothering pine trees, rooftops, and the narrow streets that curved along the frozen lake like a white ribbon of silence. Wind pressed against the windows of the small sheriff's station as if trying to whisper forgotten names. Most of the town had retreated indoors hours ago. Only one patrol truck still moved through the storm. Behind the wheel sat Officer Ethan Cole, 42 years old, 6 feet 2, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and tired blue eyes that had not learned how to rest, even when his body demanded it. His dark brown hair, streaked with early silver at the temples, was kept short in the military style he had never abandoned after leaving the service. Ethan's posture was rigid from years of discipline, yet something inside him had softened long ago, shaped by grief he carried quietly after losing his wife in a car accident 3 winters before. Since then, he spoke little, listened deeply, and worked the night shifts no one else wanted. The radio crackled beside him. Unit 3, possible distress call. Hiker reported screaming from the West Ridge Trail. Weather worsening. You're the closest. Ethan answered with a calm, steady voice, turned the wheel, and headed into the forest where the road thinned and the snow thickened. 20 minutes later, his headlights cut through a curtain of white and found a pair of faint boot tracks half buried by drifting snow. He parked the truck, pulled on his coat, and stepped into the storm. The wind struck his face like ice. He followed the sound, weak, broken, not quite a cry, until the forest opened into a narrow clearing littered with twisted wire fencing, half collapsed beneath fallen branches and snow. There, beneath the skeletal trees, Ethan saw them. A German Shepherd puppy, about 6 months old, lay stretched across the body of a young fawn tangled in the rusted fence. The puppy's coat was thick and black along the spine, fading into warm brown along the legs and chest, matted with snow and streaked with blood. Its ribs were faintly visible beneath the fur, its body thin from hunger, yet its stance was defiant. One front paw was torn, bleeding through the snow, but the puppy did not move. It raised its head when Ethan approached, ears flattened, lips curled, releasing a low growl that trembled more from exhaustion than from threat. The fawn, small and spotted, barely breathing, lay pinned by wire across one leg, its sides fluttering in shallow gasps, its eyes wide and glassy. Ethan stopped 10 feet away, raised his hands, and spoke softly. "Easy, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." The puppy did not bark. It did not flee. It only pressed its body more tightly over the fawn, as if becoming the last wall between life and whatever waited beyond the storm. Ethan recognized something in the animal's eyes. Something not wild, not feral, but chosen. He backed away and radioed for wildlife rescue and animal control, requesting thermal blankets and mild sedation for the deer. As he waited, he remained in place, talking quietly, keeping the puppy from collapsing deeper into fear. When the rescue team finally arrived, 3 figures wrapped in reflective jackets, faces red from the cold, the puppy's growl returned, weak but resolute. They worked carefully. A woman named Sarah Mitchell, early 30s, slim, 5'6", with auburn hair pulled into a low braid and steady hazel eyes that had seen too many injured animals to flinch easily, administered a light sedative to the fawn, while her partner, Tom Reyes, a broad, middle-aged man with frostbitten cheeks and a gentle voice, cut the wire. Throughout the process, the puppy did not move. Only when the fawn was freed and wrapped in a silver thermal blanket did the puppy rise. It stood on shaking legs, blood dripping from its paw onto the snow, and followed as they lifted the stretcher. Ethan knelt beside it, slowly removed his glove and let the puppy smell his hand. The puppy hesitated, then leaned forward and touched its nose to his fingers. Ethan felt something break open in his chest. "You're not alone," he whispered. "I promise." When the team loaded the fawn into their vehicle, the puppy tried to climb after it, collapsing halfway, exhaustion finally demanding its due. Ethan scooped the puppy into his arms. It was lighter than it should have been, all bone and trembling muscle. He wrapped it in his coat and carried it to his truck. As he set it on the passenger seat, the puppy's eyes followed the rescue vehicle until it disappeared into the snow. Ethan spoke the name that came to him without thinking. Atlas. The puppy did not respond, but it did not turn away. The storm closed around them, and for the first time in years, Ethan did not feel entirely alone in the dark. By the time Ethan Cole reached the small veterinary clinic on the eastern edge of Ravenwood, the blizzard had begun to ease, though the wind still prowled the streets like an animal that refused to surrender its hunt. Snow clung to the windows of the building in uneven sheets. The sign outside flickered faintly. Ravenwood Animal Care. Emergency Services. Inside, warm yellow light spilled onto the frozen pavement, a promise of shelter in a world that had forgotten what mercy felt like. Ethan carried Atlas through the door without knocking. The German Shepherd puppy's body trembled in his arms, not from fear, but from exhaustion so deep it had seeped into the bones. The puppy was still conscious, eyes open, gaze fixed on the door behind them as if expecting the forest itself to come looking. The receptionist, Lydia Barnes, a petite woman in her late 20s with soft brown curls and a nervous smile that never quite hid her strength, looked up from the counter and froze. "Oh my God," she whispered, already reaching for the phone. "Dr. Hale, emergency intake." Dr. Marcus Hale emerged moments later. He was in his early 50s, tall, lean, with silver hair at the temples and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades persuading life not to leave too soon. He took one look at Atlas and nodded sharply. "Bring him here." They laid the puppy on a steel examination table. Snow melted into small rivers beneath his fur. Dr. Hale worked quickly, checking vitals, cleaning the wound on the front paw. The gash was deep, torn by rusted wire, already showing signs of infection. Atlas did not whine. He did not snap. He simply lay still, eyes still trained on the door. Ethan stood beside the table, hands curled into fists inside his coat pockets. "How bad?" Dr. Hale glanced up. "He's been out there for weeks, maybe longer. Malnourished. Dehydrated. This paw's the worst of it, but he has older scars too. See this?" He brushed fur aside along Atlas's chest and side. Pale lines crossed the skin, some circular, some jagged. Tether marks. He was tied up, hard, long enough for the rope or chain to cut in. Ethan felt a quiet anger move through him, slow and steady like lava under ice. "Someone did this," Dr. Hale nodded. "Someone abandoned him." They cleaned the wound, administered antibiotics, wrapped the paw. Atlas flinched once when the disinfectant touched raw flesh, then stilled himself, jaw clenched, eyes unblinking. Dr. Hale watched him carefully. "He's not feral. He's trained, or was. This one's learned to obey even when he's in pain." When they were finished, Ethan carried Atlas back outside. The storm had thinned to drifting snow. He placed the puppy gently in the passenger seat of the patrol truck, wrapping him in a blanket Lydia handed over. Atlas's eyes never left the darkened road that led back toward the forest. The drive to Ethan's cabin took 15 minutes. The town lights faded behind them, replaced by the frozen lake and the line of trees beyond. Ethan's home was a modest structure of wood and stone perched at the edge of the water, a place that had once been filled with laughter and now carried only the memory of it. He parked and carried Atlas inside. The cabin was warm, the wood stove glowing faintly. Ethan set Atlas on the rug near the fire and laid out a bowl of food and water. Atlas did not move. His gaze remained fixed on the door. Ethan removed his coat and knelt beside him. "You're safe here." Atlas's ears flicked. He did not look at Ethan. That night, Atlas did not sleep. He paced the small cabin, slowly, carefully, the bandaged paw barely touching the floor. Every time the wind rattled the windows or the ice shifted on the lake, Atlas froze, ears sharp, body coiled as if ready to run. Toward dawn, he curled up by the front door, nose pressed against the wood, breathing shallow and fast. Ethan sat in the chair across the room, blanket over his shoulders, watching the puppy's chest rise and fall. He had not slept either. He understood that kind of waiting. Morning came pale and cold. Atlas had not touched the food. He allowed Ethan to clean his paw, to adjust the bandage, but when Ethan tried to move him away from the door, Atlas resisted. Not with teeth or growls. With weight. With presence. With the quiet refusal of something that had chosen a place and would not be persuaded. Around noon, the phone rang. Ethan answered on the second ring. Cole. A calm female voice. This is Dr. Naomi Foster from North Valley Wildlife Rescue. You brought in the fawn last night. Ethan's breath caught. How is she? A pause. She's alive, barely. Hypothermia, blood loss, shock. Her leg was badly cut by the wire. We've stabilized her, but the next 24 hours are critical. Ethan looked down at Atlas. The puppy's ears had lifted at the sound of the voice through the phone. His entire body had gone still. What are her chances? Ethan asked. Dr. Foster hesitated. We'll do everything we can. Ethan thanked her and ended the call. He knelt beside Atlas. She's alive. Atlas's tail moved once, just once. He walked to the bowl and drank a little water. Then he lay down near the fire, eyes still fixed on the door. The next 2 days passed slowly. Atlas ate sparingly, slept only in short bursts. Ethan took him outside only to relieve himself, never straying far from the cabin. The puppy's strength returned inch by inch, but his spirit remained anchored somewhere beyond the trees. On the third morning, Ethan received another call. Dr. Foster's voice was brighter this time. She made it through the night. She's still weak, but her temperature is stable now. She even stood for a few seconds this morning. Ethan closed his eyes. Thank you. When he opened them, Atlas was watching him. That afternoon, Atlas did something unexpected. He rose from his place by the door and walked to Ethan. He rested his head briefly against Ethan's knee. The contact lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Ethan reached out, hesitated, then placed his hand gently on Atlas's neck. Atlas did not pull away. Outside, the storm finally released its grip on the mountain. The snow began to fall in silence. And somewhere beyond the trees, a small heart kept beating because another had refused to leave. By the fourth morning after the blizzard, the mountain had fallen into a kind of fragile peace. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of white stillness that made every sound feel too loud and every movement feel like a promise that could be broken. The lake outside Ethan Cole's cabin lay frozen and glassy, reflecting a pale winter sun that did not warm but did forgive, just a little. Inside, the cabin breathed differently now. Atlas lay on the rug near the wood stove, his bandaged paw stretched forward, his body finally resting instead of braced. The German Shepherd puppy was still thin, ribs faint beneath the thickening coat, but his eyes had softened. They no longer searched the door every moment. They had begun, slowly, to look at Ethan. Ethan moved quietly through the room, as if afraid of disturbing something sacred. He had learned the rhythm of Atlas's breathing, the way the puppy shifted when he dreamed, the way his ears twitched when the wind brushed the pines outside. There was a patience in the cabin now, something that had not lived there since before the accident, before the silence that followed him home every night. He brewed coffee and sat across from Atlas, the steam curling between them. "Good morning, soldier," he said softly. Atlas lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the rug. That small sound felt like thunder. Later that morning, Ethan bundled himself in his coat and carefully clipped a leash to Atlas's collar. The collar itself was new, simple black nylon, nothing fancy, but Ethan had chosen it with care, measuring the space between Atlas's scars, making sure nothing rubbed where old wounds had healed badly. Atlas accepted the leash without resistance, though his ears tilted forward the moment the door opened. The world outside was blindingly white. They walked slowly along the edge of the lake, their footsteps the only marks on the snow. Atlas's gait was uneven but determined. He did not pull. He did not wander. He walked beside Ethan, head low, nose working the air, reading the world like a language he was only beginning to remember how to speak. Halfway through the walk, Atlas stopped. His body went rigid. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of rusted metal, old pine, frozen blood. Atlas turned his head toward the forest. Ethan followed his gaze. "Not yet," Ethan said gently. Atlas hesitated, then continued walking. But Ethan knew the place had already called to him. That afternoon, Ethan received another call from Dr. Naomi Foster at the Wildlife Center. "She stood today," Dr. Foster said, "on her own." Ethan closed his eyes. "Is she eating?" "A little," Naomi replied. "She's fighting." Ethan glanced at Atlas, who had lifted his head at the sound of the voice through the phone. "Thank you," Ethan said, "for not giving up on her." There was a pause on the line. "I don't think we're the ones who kept her alive." That night, Ethan dreamed for the first time since winter began. He dreamed of snow falling backward, of footprints filling themselves in, of a dark shape lying across something fragile and bright. When he woke, Atlas was sitting beside the bed, watching him. 2 days later, Atlas was strong enough. He did not ask with sound. He asked with his body. The moment they stepped outside, Atlas turned left, toward the forest. His leash tightened once, not in panic, not in fear, in purpose. Ethan followed. They moved through the trees slowly, carefully, the world narrowing to breath and frost and the hush of branches overhead. Atlas led without hesitation. No wrong turns. No doubt. His paws remembered the way even if his mind had tried to forget. They reached the clearing by noon. The broken fence still lay where it had fallen, half buried under snow and branches. The wind had scoured the blood away, but the shape of what had happened remained. A space pressed into the earth where two small bodies had once fought winter together. Atlas stepped forward. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. Then he sat. The forest fell utterly silent. Ethan approached slowly and knelt beside him. He reached out and placed his hand over Atlas's shoulder, feeling the warmth of living muscle beneath the thick fur. "You stayed," Ethan whispered. Atlas's ears flicked. His breath left him in a long, trembling exhale. For a moment, Ethan felt something open in his chest that he had not known was still there. A place where sorrow had lived so long it had grown roots. The forest seemed to lean inward, listening. They remained like that for a long time. When they finally turned back, Atlas did not look over his shoulder. The days that followed were quieter. Atlas slept through the nights now, curled near the stove instead of the door. He ate steadily, each meal restoring another small piece of him. Ethan brushed the burrs from his coat, spoke to him about the town, about the lake, about the woman he used to love, and the life he was still learning how to live. Atlas listened. On the 7th day after the storm, Ethan received the call he had been both waiting for and fearing. "Officer Cole," Dr. Foster said, "she's stable. We're not out of danger yet, but she's going to make it." Ethan let out a breath he had been holding for weeks. When he told Atlas, the puppy's tail swept the floor, slow and steady, like a promise. That night, Ethan made a decision. He loaded Atlas into the truck and drove toward town. The Wildlife Center was quiet when they arrived, the parking lot empty except for Naomi's car and the soft glow of lights inside. Naomi met them at the door, her coat pulled tight against the cold, her expression both cautious and hopeful. "You're sure?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "He needs to see her." They led them through the building, past the low hum of incubators and the scent of antiseptic, to a fenced outdoor enclosure where the fawn lay on a bed of straw, her slender legs folded beneath her. Her coat was cleaner now, the wound along her leg stitched and healing, her eyes no longer glassy but alert. Atlas froze the moment he saw her. He stepped forward. The fawn lifted her head. She made a small sound. Soft, unsure, but alive. Atlas lay down just outside the fence, his body stretched toward her, his chin resting on the cold ground. Neither moved. The air between them seemed to hum. Naomi knelt beside the enclosure and offered the fawn a bottle. The fawn hesitated, then drank. Ethan felt his throat close. This was not coincidence. This was memory. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. When it was time to leave, Atlas rose slowly. He looked at the fawn once more, then turned and followed Ethan out into the night. Back at the cabin, Atlas ate every bite of his meal. He lay beside Ethan's chair and slept without dreams. And the cabin, for the first time in years, felt like home. The mountain did not change quickly after what happened at the Wildlife Center. Snow still blanketed the world in quiet sheets. The sky still carried that pale, winter color that felt like the breath before a confession. But something inside the small cabin by the frozen lake had shifted, as if the walls themselves had loosened their grip on sorrow. Atlas slept deeply now. Ethan noticed it the second morning after the visit. The German Shepherd puppy no longer sprang upright at every sound, no longer kept one eye on the door and one ear on the forest. He slept stretched out by the stove, chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. When Ethan passed, Atlas's tail moved once, thumping softly against the rug, and he did not wake. Ethan made coffee and sat at the table watching the steam drift upward like the ghosts of old winters. He found himself speaking aloud again, something he had not done in a long time. "You're doing better," he told the room. Atlas's ear flicked. The days settled into a new kind of routine. Mornings by the lake, short walks, careful bandage changes, slow meals that Atlas now finished every time. Ethan brushed the puppy's thick coat on the porch while snow slid from the roof in lazy whispers. He spoke of the town of Ravenwood, of the children who once played hockey on the lake, of the diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead, of the woman he used to love and the life he had lost when winter took her away. Atlas listened, not with his ears alone, but with his whole body. On the fifth morning after the visit, Atlas stood at the door before Ethan even reached for his coat. His posture was different now, not desperate, not frantic, but certain. His eyes were clear. His tail was still. Ethan understood. "You want to go back?" he said. Atlas did not blink. They moved through the forest slowly, following the narrow trail where snow still lay untouched beneath the trees. The wind had died. Only the soft hush of their steps and the distant crack of ice on the lake accompanied them. Atlas led, never hesitating, never looking behind. His body remembered what the world had tried to bury. When the clearing opened before them, Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. The broken fence was still there, twisted and rusted, half swallowed by the earth. The snow had softened the scars of the place, but the story remained, written into the land itself. Atlas stepped forward, then stopped. He sat. The forest seemed to lean inward, holding its breath. Ethan knelt beside him, placing his gloved hand over Atlas's shoulder. He could feel the strength beneath the fur now, the steady warmth of a body that had chosen to live. "This is where you stayed," Ethan said, quietly. Atlas's breath shuddered once. They remained like that for a long time. The silence did not feel empty. It felt full, of memory, of waiting, of everything that had almost been lost and somehow had not. When they turned back, Atlas did not look over his shoulder. Back at the cabin, Atlas slept even deeper that night. Ethan sat by the window watching the snow fall and realized, with a strange ache in his chest, that he was no longer alone in the quiet. The cabin had learned how to breathe again. 3 days later, the phone rang. Dr. Naomi Foster's voice carried warmth through the line. "She's walking now. Still weak, but strong enough to explore the enclosure. We think she's going to recover fully." Ethan closed his eyes. "Can he see her again?" There was a pause. "It's not standard practice," Naomi said. "But, yes, I think he should." They arrived at the Wildlife Center that afternoon. The sky was pale gold, the sun hovering low behind the mountains. Atlas walked beside Ethan, calm and focused, his bandaged paw now only lightly wrapped. Aurora stood in the enclosure when they arrived, slender legs braced, her body steadier than before. When she saw Atlas, her ears twitched. She stepped forward once, then again. Atlas lay down at the fence. They stayed that way as the light shifted and the world slowed around them. No movement. No sound. Just two beings who had chosen each other when nothing else remained. When it was time to leave, Atlas rose slowly. He looked at Aurora one last time, then turned away. On the drive home, he slept in the back seat for the first time. Ethan smiled. The morning the world finally softened, the snow fell without wind. Ethan Cole stood at the window of his cabin, coffee growing cold in his hands, watching the quiet drift down from the sky. Winter had loosened its grip. The lake no longer groaned beneath its frozen skin. The forest breathed again. Atlas sat at his feet, alert but calm. The German Shepherd puppy had changed. His coat was thick now, rich black and bronze in the sunlight. His ribs no longer showed. The scars across his chest and side had faded into pale lines beneath the fur, reminders of another life, another winter. The phone rang. Dr. Naomi Foster's voice carried both caution and hope. Aurora is strong enough for limited release conditioning. We'll be moving her to the forest enclosure today. Ethan closed his eyes. Can he come? A pause. Yes, but no contact. She needs to remember the wild. They drove in silence, the mountains rolling past in quiet waves of white and gray. Atlas lay in the back seat, eyes open, breathing slow, as if he already understood the gravity of what waited. The Wildlife Center stood at the edge of the valley, ringed by tall pines and low stone fencing. Naomi met them at the gate. She looked tired but peaceful, the way people do when they've watched life return from the brink. She's ready, Naomi said. They led Ethan and Atlas to the forest enclosure. Aurora stood among the trees, slender legs steady now, her coat clean and bright. When she saw Atlas, she froze. Atlas stepped forward. Then he stopped. He lowered himself to the ground at the fence, his body stretched toward her, his head resting on the cold earth. Aurora took one step, then another. They stood in silence, separated by wire and distance in the world that had tried to end them both. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Not pain, but reverence. Minutes passed. Aurora turned. She walked deeper into the trees. Atlas did not follow. He remained where he was, watching until the forest swallowed her shape. Naomi spoke softly behind them. That's how it's supposed to be. Ethan nodded. On the drive home, Atlas did not cry. He did not pace. He rested his head against the seat and slept. That night, he lay beside the hearth, his body loose, his breathing deep. Ethan sat in the chair across from him, listening to the crackle of fire and the gentle music of a heart no longer at war. 3 days later, the final call came. She's being released at dawn tomorrow, Naomi said. They arrived before sunrise. Mist hovered over the valley. The transport crate stood open in the clearing. Aurora waited inside, ears flicking, nose lifted to the wind. Atlas sat beside Ethan, unmoving. The handlers stepped back. Aurora walked forward. She paused. She turned her head. Atlas stood once. Their eyes met. Then she turned and vanished into the forest. Atlas sat down again. The wind moved through the trees like a blessing. On the drive home, Atlas curled in the back seat and slept. At the cabin, he lay not by the door, not by the window, but in the center of the room, as if the world no longer needed guarding. Ethan watched him, heart full and aching at the same time. Love, he realized, was not about holding. It was about knowing when to release. Spring arrived quietly in Ravenwood, not with trumpets or fireworks, but with the simple courage of green pushing through the snow. Ethan Cole noticed it first along the edge of the lake, where the ice began to fracture into delicate blue veins. Then in the forest, where pine needles glistened with meltwater, and the wind no longer howled but whispered. The cabin, once a monument to winter, had learned the language of light. Atlas changed with the season. The German Shepherd puppy, once all ribs and shadow, now stood tall and sure, his coat gleaming under the thin mountain sun. His scars were still there, faint beneath the fur, but they no longer told the whole story. He moved through the world with a quiet attentiveness, neither fearful nor restless, as if the weight he had carried in the snow had finally been set down. They settled into a rhythm. Morning walks along the thawing trail, afternoons by the porch while Ethan repaired old boards and Atlas lay with his head on his paws, watching clouds cross the sky. Evenings by the hearth where Ethan spoke of his wife, of the life he once had, and of the strange mercy of finding something new without losing what had been. Atlas listened. Not the way people listen, but the way the earth listens when rain finally comes. One afternoon, as Ethan walked Atlas through town, they passed the elementary school. Recess had spilled across the playground. Children ran, shouted, laughed. Atlas slowed. A little girl stood near the fence, alone. She was small, maybe 7 years old, with dark curls and eyes too large for her thin face. Her name was Lily Moore, and the teachers whispered that she had stopped speaking after her father died in a mine collapse the previous winter. Atlas sat. Lily stared at him. Slowly, she stepped closer and reached out, touching the edge of his fur with trembling fingers. Atlas did not move. Lily smiled. Ethan felt something settle in his chest. Days later, the school counselor, Martha Reynolds, a calm woman in her early 50s with kind gray eyes and a voice that carried storms into stillness, asked Ethan if Atlas could visit again. Children began sitting near him, drawing pictures, resting their heads against his side, breathing more slowly, as if his presence reminded their hearts how to beat. "He's already doing the work," Martha said. Ethan had never planned this life. But some things chose him. Word spread through Ravenwood. The Veterans Center invited Atlas to visit. Then the library. Then the hospital wing where elderly patients lay staring at ceilings that had forgotten how to hope. Atlas walked among them with quiet grace. He never barked, never demanded, he only stayed. One evening, after a long day, Ethan sat at the table holding a small metal tag. He clipped it onto Atlas's collar. Atlas, found in the snow, lives in our hearts. Atlas's tail thumped once. That night, Ethan dreamed of the clearing again. But this time the snow was gone. The forest was alive with birds and light. Atlas stood beside him, not guarding, not waiting. Just there. Weeks later, Ethan received a letter from the Wildlife Center. Aurora had joined a migrating herd. She was strong. She was free. Ethan read the words aloud. Atlas closed his eyes. They walked that evening to the edge of the forest. The broken fence was nearly swallowed by new growth. Atlas stood where he had once bled, once waited, once held the world together with his small body. Then he turned. He walked back to Ethan. No hesitation. No looking behind. Ethan knelt and rested his forehead against Atlas's. "Welcome home," he whispered. The sun dipped behind the mountains, and Ravenwood glowed gold. Winter had taught them both how to survive. Love taught them how to live. Sometimes God does not send miracles from the sky. He sends them on 4 legs through the snow. He places courage in the heart of a small wounded dog and hope in the hands of a tired human being, so that both may discover the reason they were still breathing. This story reminds us that even when life feels frozen, even when the road ahead is silent and heavy, God is still working in ways we cannot see, through kindness, through sacrifice, through the simple choice to stay when everything says to run. In your daily life, when you face fear, loss, or loneliness, remember this story. Remember that God often answers pain with purpose and turns waiting into healing, and turns strangers into family. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you, and if you believe in the power of love and faith, please comment. Amen. May God bless you and everyone watching. May He protect your home, your heart, and your loved ones. And may He guide you through every winter into the light of a new beginning. Please support our channel by pressing subscribe. Your support allows us to keep sharing stories that heal the soul and bring light into the world.